Okay, yeah, so I'm Attiya, and this is my book, 10 Steps to Us, which came out on the 9th of September with hashtag Black, which is a sort of an imprint of hashtag press. It's a new publisher and they're trying to promote more diverse voices. But my book is basically, it's a romance because like everybody loves romance, right? So but my protagonist is so this is depiction of this Aisha. She's a devout hijab wearing Muslim, and she lives in Kent, and it's not very diverse. And one day when she's getting bullied at the bus stop, this like really handsome guy kind of steps in and saves her, and she develops an attraction to him. And but she knows she's not supposed to like him because she's Muslim and he's not Muslim. And it's all about her sort of struggle with her faith and her identity. um so that's what the essence of, so at the heart of it is a romance, but but also it's an exploration of her faith and her struggle with being a Muslim, a sort of trying to be a practicing Muslim while living in the West. And there's also all these like subplots where so she's got a best friend who isn't very nice to her, which I'm sure we've all had at some point, right? Like when your friend isn't very supportive. So it's about frenemies. So there's a bit of social media trolling. There's a subplot about domestic violence. So they all sound like really heavy topics, like faith, Islamophobia, this, that. They all sound really, really hardcore, heavy topics, but actually it's very light-hearted. So it's like a light sort of book to read. I think it's quite an easy read, people said, and they've read it quickly as well. So it's not tough, but it does tackle those themes in it.
I think from my experience of reading it,
Yeah,
I think the romance element of it makes it really kind of accessible. So
yeah,
while there are these kinds of really difficult topics that are kind of looked at within the
yeah,
kind of book, the fact that there's this kind of romance throughout it kind of makes it really accessible, um,
yeah,
and a
yeah.
real joy to read, even though some of the kind of topics that are kind of challenged and brought up in the book are quite hard hitting and thought provoking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I thought, everybody, I'm sure we've all liked someone that you're not supposed to like, right? And we've all been there. You fancy the pants off someone and you know you're not supposed to, and then all the feelings that sort of churns up. So, yeah, I think most people can relate to that aspect of it.
Yeah. With um with the story, how important was it to kind of communicate the sense of kind of a struggle with identity, but kind of brought on by your own emotions, like an inner struggle? I think a lot of books can kind of focus on that outer struggle of kind of society, and obviously that's touched upon in this book as well. But I really found that the character's own kind of struggles, from her emotions and how she feels about people, and obviously the loving someone that she doesn't think she should really love. How important was it to kind of have that inner, I guess, monologue going on throughout the book?
Yeah, that was really important to me because when I was growing up, well, there weren't many things with ethnic people in them for the start, and the things there were like really the parents suppressing the child, and they really just wanted to break out and be very westernized, and it was all stuff about forced arranged marriages and things like that, which I was kind of like, bored of. So I wanted it more to be about the struggle within yourself. So about where, because that's the struggle that I felt when I was growing up. I didn't quite fit into with white people. I didn't quite fit with Asians. I always felt that I was too, Asian people would say I was too westernized, and but then I didn't drink, so then I wasn't, so I didn't felt sort of stuck in the middle in no man's land. So what I really wanted to capture was that kind of like angst when you're not quite sure where you fit, and the struggle that you that sort of struggle, it was all internal. It wasn't about the parents really. It was all that, because that's all been done, you know, like forced arranged marriage, and you know, and the in those stories it was the protagonists seemed very clear about what they wanted, that they didn't want to have an arranged marriage, didn't want to break up, but actually a lot of people wouldn't mind having an arranged marriage. They wouldn't mind being part of their culture. They feel torn between the two. So that's what I wanted to capture.
Yeah, because I definitely found that really refreshing, that it was more about the identity of the main character and figuring out what they wanted. It was like a really refreshing way to kind of look at the world. So I think it came across really well, and I always wonder with these kinds of things if they were kind of intentional. So it's really
Yeah,
nice to know that they were.
yeah, definitely, yeah, because a lot of the stories you just assumed that the person really wants to be very westernized, when that isn't always the case. You may not, you may not want to. You may want to be a bit in the middle. So that was the thing that I was going for, is about the middle ground. So that a lot of people find themselves in. So yeah, that was the approach that I took.
Yeah, it was beautifully done. Like I loved it. And it was so nice to see it from a different viewpoint for a change, because as you say, a lot of kind of previous literature or even television programs and films have all focused on one kind of narrative,
Yeah,
and within the world there isn't a group of people that all fit in one narrative. So it's
exactly.
really refreshing to see it from kind of the other viewpoint as well. um with the romance element, obviously, Darren comes from London,
Yeah, East London. Yeah,
East London, and therefore kind of comes from an area where um, it's more diverse compared to Kent, where our main
yeah,
character is.
yeah.
Was that always going to be the case? Because I found that quite nice, that contrast between obviously their two experiences, coming from a place that was more diverse, um, and a person who's kind of not used to that and is always viewed as a minority in the area that they are.
Yeah, so I mean, so yeah, I remember. I remember meeting this somebody's child, and that they were like they went to school in Bow, and they were the only white person in the school. So everyone else was, so it was the opposite. They were they were in the minority. The most of the there was, I think the school was 98% Muslims, and
Yeah.
it's really interesting because he knew so much about Muslim. And he knew loads of like swear words and Bengali swear words and stuff like that. So it's really interesting that he had that kind of in-depth knowledge just from being immersed in it. Um, and then I grew up in Kent, and I also worked there kind of recently, and it's still there's pockets of it that are really just not very diverse at all. And it was almost, I was working there like recently this year, and it was almost like stepping back in time, like it's like it's like being in the 70s or something. And just so people didn't know stuff like they'd not heard of Eid, or they didn't know they'd not heard of they didn't know what fasting was. And it was just very interesting, because I think in London you can get into a little bubble where you just assume that everybody knows everything. um and then outside of London it can be quite different. So yeah, I wanted to so yeah, the fact that he was from there and he had knowledge about her culture, that was part of her attraction to him, because it kind of felt like he, because she's so isolated, you know, nobody got her, nobody understood her, that, you know, her friend thought she was weird for fasting. So you know, that was part of the attraction, that he was the only one that really got her, who could relate to her. So that was definitely part of it. I do think where you grow up, where you work, what it does influence your knowledge of different people, different cultures and things.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of where I grew up and
Yeah,
where I studied.
Yeah.
kind of mirror that a little bit. So I
Yeah.
studied in Manchester, and
Yeah.
that's where I came across a lot of my knowledge that I now
Yeah.
have, because there were other cultures and people I could meet and kind of
Yeah.
gain information from, whereas
Yeah.
where I kind of grew up, there
Yeah.
wasn't that opportunity at all. So it was really interesting to see those two kind of um, elements kind of combined in the text.
Oh yeah. Actually, my daughter's at Manchester University. She just started. She's loving it.
Yeah, I've moved back now, but I did stay in Manchester for a long time after my
It's a nice
degree.
city. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I really did like Manchester.
Yeah.
I learned a lot at uni, but I learned a lot by just kind of being there as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I do think that's a really interesting thing that's in your book as well, those different um, environments having kind of an input into how much people kind of are aware of things.
But even if you work in different parts of London, even like if you work in North London in Stamford Hill, there's a big Orthodox Jewish community there. You learn all this stuff, and then you go, 5 minutes down the road to Hackney, and it's all completely different. And so you get little pockets of areas, and you just pick up things just by immersing yourself in different cultures. So it's interesting, definitely.
Where did the kind of inspiration for your characters come from? Was there kind of like a real world inspiration, or were they just characters that kind of bubbled in the back of your head and had to be written about?
So, I mean, I think when I started this, it was the opening scene was a writing exercise in a creative writing class. And then, so it was just, when they do that free writing exercise, just write anything. So it came out in that. And then people were like, oh, you've got to write this book. And so then it kind of developed from there. So obviously there are elements of people that I've come across. No one, it's all fictional. So
Yeah.
so a lot of people will be like, "Are you Aisha?" I'm like, no. Unfortunately, some hunky guy never saved me at the bus stop, but like, so that's not me. But obviously there's elements of myself, there's elements of my family, things that I grew up with that come into it through my work because I'm a GP and worked in East London. I've worked in Ilford for 8 years. I've seen a lot of things there, that elements that I've seen through my work, just things that you notice, they get in there somehow, like you just find um there's certain things that you just, oh, you're like, oh yeah, that's so, there's elements of people that are mixed together. So it's all probably based somewhere from something that I've seen or observed in real life, to be honest.
Yeah, and you mentioned you're a GP.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to diagnose any of my problems. Because I feel like if that would be the one thing I'd hate if I was kind of a medical professional. Someone being like, "Whilst I have you, can you tell me about this thing?" But do you think, how was it kind of being a GP and kind of having this creative writing outlet as well? Were they totally separate kind of parts of you, do you think, or do you think they ever interweaved?
Well, this so they're quite simple because I kind of used to do writing for stress relief, to be honest, because my job's quite stressful. Plus, I've got 3 kids, and that's kind of stressful as well. So it used to just be like a outlet. But in a way, like medical writing, like when you write medical notes, they're very concise and to the point and factual. So it actually would get in the way because people would be like, "You haven't written anything." Where's the rest of it? Like, where's all the description and stuff? I'd have really the bare bones because I was used to writing in a very concise, sort of scientific way. So I had to kind of relearn how to how to how to write the details. And sometimes you'll see it in like X-ray reports. You'll see that there's a radiographer who really should has got creative side, because they'll describe something in real detail about someone's lungs, and you're like, just get to the point, get to the point what you're trying to say here. But I'd be like really descriptive about the appearance of somebody's lungs. You're like, oh, you should really do writing, but you'll see it, and they're almost too, they almost counteract each other, because in creative writing you have to really overthink everything and focus on the details, whereas in medical you have to get to the point. So, but having said that, because of the nature of my job, I hear stories almost every day. I mean, they're people's real lives, you know. So, and some of the things I hear are kind of like, wow, like jaw-dropping, very interesting. And so elements of that come into it, and the effects that, like, I don't know, effects that their illnesses or their social situation has on them, it all feeds into the creative process. But in terms of in terms of the writing, I had to really kind of relearn creative writing, because yeah, they'd be like, you've only the critique group would be like, this is just the bare where are we, where's the setting, you know. So I had to really focus on that again.
That's really interesting, because that's not something you really think of, obviously outside the medical field, how like precise your notes would kind of like have to be kind of in the medical field, and obviously to the point, compared with like kind of writing a novel, and how, I don't want to say flowery, but like how much description and things go into kind of like a piece of writing for a novel instead. So that's really interesting how kind of different they are.
But it's also like the process of overthinking, because I am a bit of an overthinker, which in a creative world is actually quite useful, because so you like obsess about something enough, and you can really get it and get it down on the page, because you've thought about it. But in like a medical thing, you don't want to be overthinking everything too much, because then you can't sleep at night worrying about, you know, X, Y, and Z. So you have to, it's finding that kind of balance. So yeah, they're kind of contrasting, but they do sort of meet in the middle. And I think there's a lot of, I think there are like courses, masters in medicine and literature, and how the two kind of interweave. So yeah,
That's
no,
really interesting.
yeah,
And
yeah,
we do have some questions from the book club now, and
yeah,
the favorite one I like to ask, just
yeah.
because it is a very stressful question, even for me personally. I hate it when I get asked this question, and that is, do you have a favorite book, and if you do, what is it? It
Oh,
doesn't
so for
have to
me
be
that's so,
YA, it can
that's,
be anything.
yeah, for me that's easy.
See,
Because
I forget everything I've ever read when somebody asks me
oh
that
right.
question.
Well, the thing was, for like 10 years, because when I was growing up I used to read all the time, that was my thing. But after I had my kids, I was so busy and like with work for 10 years. I didn't read a book. Like, I'd read a book then fall asleep, and I couldn't finish a book. And then I read this book by Kazuo Ishiguro, who everybody knows now because he won the Nobel Prize, but at that time, not everybody knew him. And I read this book called A Pale View of Hills. And I read it in like one day, and it was like, wow, Jesus, this is so good. But then also it's like, what happened? Like, it was just it played on my mind for ages. And then after that, I got back into reading because of him, really. And then I started reading all his books. And then lately, I've got into Elif Shafak, the Turkish writer, because she
Yeah.
wrote this book called Honor. And then I've started reading all her books, and there's this one called The 40 Rules of Love, which is about Sufism, which is really amazing. And and there was one called The Three Daughters of Eve,
Oh,
which
I've
was
not heard
just,
of that one.
yeah, it's basically there's three types of Muslim girls in it. So there's like a really extreme one, a moderate, and a really westernized one. And but it's not like it doesn't feel like a lecture. She writes it so brilliantly that it just really was a story. So that was really brilliant. But yeah, but for 10 years I didn't read a single book till I came across that book, A Pale View of Hills, which I just think everybody should read, because it was just like fantastic, to be honest.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite thing about the writing process? I know some people really love some elements of writing and then hate things like editing. So do you have a process, a part of the process that you like more than another bit?
Sometimes I wonder why I do it, because it's so hard. Just sometimes I'm like, I hate this. It's so I'm trying to write something new at the moment. I'm finding it really difficult, actually. So I think once, when I had finished the whole manuscript, I was so proud of myself, because like, it was such a huge document to actually finish it. I never thought I'd finish a book. So once I'd finished that, I was so happy. So the editing process, um, that was a little bit easier than writing from scratch. And also, especially, when you get stuck in the plot structure and you're like, oh my God, I have no idea what happens next, right? So then you just stop writing, start doing laundry and stuff instead. So I think, yeah, not having a clear plan can be really difficult. But I I say I liked editing, but when it got to the, like, we had to do so many edits and there were so many tight deadlines. And I mean, to be fair, the edits got less and less each time. But you were like, oh, not this again. You're just, oh God, I'm sick of this book. Yeah.
Can I write something else now?
Yeah. just I just was so tired of it. But you have to go over it again and again and again. And then, so I like the first edits, the first round of edits, because then it's
I
like,
can
yeah.
imagine, like,
But by the fifth round, I might be a bit tired. But
yeah,
yeah,
I can imagine that would be the case. I think I'd be quite similar. I'd like to have like finished kind of getting it on the page,
yeah,
but not have got to the point where I've gone through it a lot.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that kind of middle stage would probably be like my favorite bit. The like
yeah,
I've got it to where it is, and before I've read it through however many times and changed it. Like I think it would be that kind of like moment where you're just like, I've done the thing and I'm
yeah,
playing with it a bit
yeah,
now. I
yeah.
think I'd be the same.
Well,
Um,
then when it's like you have got to get sorted by such and such date, you're like, how?
oh, I can't do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
deadlines
But
are
deadlines are good, because
stressful
deadlines are good though, because there's nothing like a deadline to get
to
the work
get you
done. Yeah,
working.
yeah,
um, Another question that they were all really interested in was, do you write for anybody in particular? Like, do you have a particular person in your mind when you're writing, or do you write more for yourself to kind of get the story out of your head kind of thing?
Oh yeah, no, I'll not write for other people. I'm selfish. I write for, I write for myself, and I know that I have offended a few people. So I think I got a lot of online abuse from some bloggers, and I don't really care, to be honest, because I didn't write it for them. I wrote it for myself,
Yeah,
and I think they misinterpreted some stuff that I'd written, because I think one of the bloggers had said that I had equated removing the hijab with freedom, and I purposely didn't do that, because there's a whole chapter where she takes it off and she feels naked, and they'd misread it and said that I'd said that taking it off made them free, which I didn't, and that's their interpretation.
yeah,
But it was kind of like, if you want to read it that way, that's your problem. Do you know what I mean? So, but I don't feel apologetic about anything that I've written, because I've written it for myself. I was a bit nervous when my mum read it, because my mum read it because I was dropping my daughter to university, and the kids, my son's told me she's reading. I was like, oh God, when I get home, she's going to give me a right lecture. But she was a bit like, where did you come up with the intimate scenes? Stuff like that. So, but she did like it. She read it in a day. So, but I write for myself, because you can't please everyone. So so I write what I want to write. I don't care what other people really think, to be honest. If they like it, that's a bonus.
yeah. So, Another question they asked was if any particular experiences have ever influenced your writing.
So you know, I was saying about the opening scene. So that actually did happen to me when I was growing up. Unfortunately, it wasn't this gorgeous guy that saved me. It was my sister, because she's quite tough. So I remember we'd stand at the bus stop, and I was really geeky, had these massive glasses. I was very shy, and then they'd be like, "Oh, smoke, smoke." It was like the 80s, and it was really racist in those days. I don't remember. It was so bad actually when I think back, the stuff that we put up with. And they'd be like, smoke, smoke a cigarette, and like practically forcing it down your throat. And I was just like, and then my sister would be like, get off, get lost. Yeah. So she's Darren. So she got rid of these boys because she was tough enough to deal with them. So that was the opening scene was based on these real characters. And yeah, like I said, when I grew up in the 80s, and people were just walking down the street, people just like hurl racist abuse at you, and you'd just be like, you just have to take it. And you almost got used. In fact, this story with the cricketer, it's really brought back a lot of that stuff about how normalized it was, and how he didn't realize that what was happening to him was actually so bad
Yeah.
because it was so normal. And I just kind of got used to being racially abused every day on my way to school, and after a bit it didn't bother me. And but it hasn't happened for ages, except for during the pandemic. When the pandemic started, um a couple of times, I was in Epping Forest, and this guy, I think we were the only ethnic minorities in walking around. This guy just stopped his car and started swearing at us, "Go home," expletives, yeah, and just aimed at me, aimed at us. Sorry, my family were with me, and then because it's so bad because I was so desensitized, because I was used to it from when I was growing up. I was just like, what an idiot, and then walked on. And then I looked around, and my kids were like crying, and I'm like, what are you crying about? He's an idiot. And then but they'd never experienced it, which is good that they hadn't. But I was like, oh right, this affects people. I was just so hardened to it. But it was sad because it hadn't happened for years, and it felt almost like the pandemic was kind of it legitimized being like that again. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's sort of element of it. Yeah, the racism and things. I don't want to go through that again. It was horrible actually. But as I said, at the time it felt so, you're just like, oh, you just got used to it. It made it extremely tough, to be honest.
Yeah. I can't imagine obviously having to deal with anything like that, and I think it's awful and shouldn't have happened then, and especially now it shouldn't happen. And I hate that the pandemic's kind of given rise to it again, or allowed it to become more vocal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's horrible. Yeah, it's pretty horrible. I was going on a home visit actually. Actually, the second time it happened in the pandemic, I was going on a home visit. So I had to certify a dead body, and I was kitted up with the mask and this and that. And then someone, so I don't know, I'm laughing, but someone shouted out of their car, like, go home. And I was like, go home where? To like Walthamstow? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm born here. And then as if I went home, we all went home. Who'd run your NHS for you? Do you know what I mean? So I was just like really, it was upsetting actually that it would research, but I haven't felt it for ages. So, anyway, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So
Very true.
yeah.
Shouldn't have to though.
Yeah.
And the last question that they asked is somewhat of an easier one, and that is, have you always kind of had this feeling that you wanted to write and maybe become an author, or was that not something that you thought of when you were younger at all, and it has just kind of resurfaced or shown up as you've kind of gone through life?
No, when I was a little girl, it was like a childhood dream. I was like I said, I was a very voracious reader. I used to love Little Women and Emily Bronte, all the classics and stuff. I really wanted to be a writer. I remember one of my English teachers entered my story for this writing competition, and I think that put the seed into my head. And I remember saying to my dad that I wanted to do English at university, and he'd be like, "Why would you want to do that? It's a waste of time." Stuff like that. And then I sort of probably pursued the more conventional medical career, which actually I really love. So I don't mind that he did. There was a little bit of pressure to go down that road, which I don't mind because I really enjoy my job, which is fine. But my passion was about writing and literature and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, ever since I was a little girl, it's like a dream. And so when they #Black took me on, and then because there were so many delays with the pandemic, because my book was meant to come out in May and it came out in September because of printers and this and that. I was like, this is never going to happen, right? So when it did happen, it really was like, sort of the delayed gratification. It's like, yeah, it's like a total dream come true. It was like having a baby or something. It's like
That's amazing.
yeah.
Yeah, like I think there's it's always interesting to see the kind of journeys people go on from kind of what they wanted to do when they were like a kid and what that kind of dream was, and the journey they kind of go on to get there, and it's not always kind of that straightforward
Oh,
path.
it's very difficult.
There
Yeah.
can be kind of like obstacles and changes in directions and everything.
Yeah.
So
Because I remember when I was in my 30s, and I think my sister said, "Don't you think if it was going to happen, it would have happened by now?" And I was like, "Shush, I'm going to ignore that."
yeah,
Just keep going. But often it's a question of time. Writing is very time consuming, and if you've got a job and a family, and then it's hard to find the times to sit down and write. So it's not it's often circumstances, isn't it, as well?
yeah,